I want to welcome everybody. Excited to share this session with you as future athletic directors and future leaders of our business. As Doc said, my name is Alex Ricker-Gilbert, Athletics Director and Senior Vice President at Jacksonville University in Jacksonville, Florida. You can tell by the glare on my screen, it's sunny here in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm thrilled to be able to moderate this session on setting expectations for the head coach. We have a great group of panelists who will be spending the next hour with you. For introductions, instead of reading resumes to introduce each of our panelists, which I would argue should have been done prior to the session, I'm going to tell you a story about the connection between our panelists. I think that's an important distinction. Connections and relationships are what make this business go, not words or on a resume or job titles in our field. I personally saw each of these panelists' faces light up last night in our prep session when they saw each other. And that's what this is all about. So our first pair, our first two, Mark Benson, Athletic Director at Albany, and Coach McNamee, Coach Mac. Mark hired Coach Mac at Albany in 2016 to be the women's basketball coach. Coach, prior to that, had taken several years off from coaching to be a stay-at-home mom before taking on the head coach role at NAIA Pikeville in Kentucky. You don't see the jump from NAIA to Division I head women's basketball coach all too often. But Mark loved Coach's energy, passion, family-oriented nature, and with 3 daughters of his own, knew that Coach was the right role model for his young women at Albany. I think Coach would tell you that Mark took a chance on her, but Mark would beg to differ. He knew Coach was a star in the making, who's now the head coach at Boston College. A players truly do attract A players. The second pair I'd like to introduce, Doc Sander, at the time, the AD at VCU, and Denise Schilte-Brown, at the time, became the head coach at VCU. In 2000, Doc found her at just 26 years of age after being the head coach for 2 years at UMBC. The VCU program was in its infancy, and Doc knew it needed a spark. He set out to search. He set out on a search with the exact idea of who he wanted in the job. Somebody who was young, energetic, passionate, excellent track record as a player, and Coach fit all those to a T. But Coach wasn't so sure she was ready for the job or was going to get the job. But to her surprise, soon after the interview, almost sight unseen, Doc hired Coach Schilte-Brown, and the rest is history. One of the best women's soccer coaches in the country over the last 20 years, now the head coach at USF. And our last pair, Jeff Schemmel and Kelvin Sampson, their story is a little bit different. The Schemmel-Sampson story started when Jeff Schemmel was at Minnesota. Jeff got to know Coach Sampson because he wanted to hire him as their basketball coach. As coaching searches go, the stars didn't align, but Jeff and Coach Sampson stayed in touch over the years. Over the course of the next decade, they got to know each other better and better. And when it came time for University of Houston to make a hire in 2014, Jeff knew who he would recommend for that hire. It may not have worked out at Minnesota, but they got their guy at Houston. 3 NCAA tournament appearances in a row later, the story writes itself. Again, it's all about relationships. And with that, I'll get right into our questions. First one for Mark. We have aspiring athletic directors here with us today, and depending on their path, Mark, I was one of these administrators. Some become deputy ADs or athletic directors without much experience as sport administrators. drawing on your experience going from Senior Associate AD at Old Dominion to AD at Albany, what are 2 or 3 things in the first 90 days in the chair you would recommend doing in order to set the right tone and expectation with a head coach or head coaches?
Alex, thanks. First of all, I really appreciate being a part of this great panel, and I really enjoyed your introduction. I love how you did that. It's good storytelling and better than just reading off a sheet of paper. So appreciate that intro. And it's great to see Coach Mack again. And the real story is I knew she was going to make me look smart and good at what I'm doing, and she sure did. And I will always be grateful and thankful to her for that. So, but yeah, I came up through the development ranks. Really never had a chance to oversee any sport program. Certainly as I raised through my career, and fundraising was part of discussion, whether it be facility and financing and fundraising. So had a lot of interaction with our AD and our head coaches over the years through that process, and just fundraising in general with major gifts. Until Wood Seelig here came to ODU and gave me the chance to supervise our nationally ranked sailing program. So that was my first foray as a sport administrator. But for those of us that don't have that type of background and experience to oversee sports, for me, when I got to Albany, it sounds cliche, but I really was on a listening tour. I wanted to meet personally as soon as I could with each of our head coaches individually. Obviously, I had a chance to meet collectively with the head coaches and staff right up front. And then I quickly set appointments one-on-one with all head coaches. And I even drilled down further that to our assistant coaches, and then eventually the entire staff, because I knew nothing about the University at Albany other than the research I had done. I didn't know an administrator. I didn't know a coach. So it was really important for me to hear from people. So what are the things that are great about you, Albany? What are the things that are important? What are the things that, we shouldn't touch, that we should honor, that are going well? And then try to find out a little bit about what needs improvement and how do we go about doing that. So that was my first step. And as I was doing that, I sent a survey out to the coaches in advance. Right, I had probably it was 2 pages just to find out, who are in their opinion, who are the 3 most influential people in this department? Who are the 3 most influential people on this campus? Who are the 3 most influential people in the community? Folks that I need to get to know quickly. What are your top 3 priorities? What are things that need immediate attention? What are things that need mid-range attention? And long-term, what are we thinking for your program? And what are the non-negotiables in your opinion? What are the things that are working so well that we should not touch? What are the things that we should address? So through those 2 processes, the survey I think is a great tool to learn, but also that individual meeting. And then it's important, like as you mentioned, out, this is a relationship business. Whether you're a coach recruiting players or staff, or you're an administrator, hiring coaches, recruiting staff, it's a people business. And so relationships take time. It's not like you're going to just walk into a situation and gain immediate respect, right? Everyone's going to say, yep, we're going to do exactly what you say. I walked into a situation, highly successful coaches, many of whom had been here for a very long period of time. So I felt it was upon me to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of building that relationship. So I would also say it's important to build in time in a non-formal setting, right? That could be, talking to your football coach at the baseball game, or talking to your softball coach at the soccer game, and just spending some time outside of the office, making time. Let's go. I spent, there's a Starbucks at Stuyvesant Plaza that's like half a mile from our campus. And in my first 9 days, I think everyone there knew me by name, because that's where I had a lot of these meetings. So I would say, listen, absorb, learn, survey, and spend time, I think, are the best ways to sort of develop that relationship. And while you're doing that, you can get your vision out. You can talk about the things that are important to you. And hopefully, if the hiring process went right, I was a good fit, I hope, for University of Albany at what they were looking to do. And I think I was a good fit for where they were at this time. So that helps if the hiring process goes well. So you're already somewhat aligned philosophically, and then you just get into your vision, how you want things to do, and just you communicate consistently and communicate often is the best way, in my opinion.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think tendency might be to go in and think about what change needs to be made. But in reality, the approach that I think is commonly successful is that sit down, listen to people who are already there to get an understanding. And then after that listening, after that learning occurs, move on and look at what you want to implement. So really appreciate that. Coach Mack, we are going to talk about transition. You started at BC, a high major in 2018 after a very successful stint at Albany, making Mark look extraordinary as an athletic director, a mid-major there. You were hired at BC by Martin Jarman, and last May, Martin was hired away by UCLA, and BC hired Pat Kraft from Temple. All amidst the worst health crisis our country has seen since 1918. Can you speak about how you've been able to manage up to your administrators, your athletic directors during this time, while navigating different styles in a time when face-to-face interaction is obviously limited?
Yes, and first, thanks for TopConnect, Alex, and Mark. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. And he's crazy when he says I made him look good. If it wasn't for him, I would have probably right now be at the NAIA level and be more of a mom than a coach. And coaching is where my blood is. So I'm so glad that he took a chance on me and let me get back into the business at this level. So with that being said, you know, with Mark when he hired me, and then when Martin, when he hired me, they were in their third and then second years at their schools. And I think a big thing maybe what that enabled me to do as a coach is they were really transparent with me of what the expectations were of our program. So when I got hired at Albany, it was this ultra successful women's basketball program that I was trying to take over. And Mark had a lot of pressure on him to fill that position with a good person. And here he took a chance on a practical stay-at-home mom. So it was very, for him, you know, he made that clear, like, hey, not so much I took a chance on you, but more so we're in this together. Like, I believe in you. And it really gave me that comfort level to know that his expectations weren't for me to go and win more championships like the previous coach did. It was for me to do my best with what I had, and that this was going to be a different year. And, you know, as a coach, and I think all of you guys deal with coaches, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So to have an AD maybe alleviate some of that pressure by just saying, I believe in you and I believe in what you can do, that really helped me have more confidence in what I was doing. Then same thing when I got hired by Martin, it was his second year here. And he really, again, you know, he joked, and he's a basketball guy. So he came to our practices, and after one of the practices, he said, boy, I'm glad I fought for you to have a 6-year contract. And it just made me feel good. It was like a joke that was kind of funny, but it was also let me know, okay. And he said the expectations are just to continue to get the program better and better. And again, that transparency. But what they both did is they made me feel trusted and also letting me know what the athletic department's goals were. And that allowed me to really have their back because I felt like they had my back. And I think that's a really big, like I would consider Mark a friend. Right now, Martin yesterday texted me and was like, good luck with the first day of practice. I consider both people my friends. So I think when you can get on a level where your athletic director is also somebody that you feel like is really in your corner, you'll fight for them and they'll fight for you. So through COVID now with the change here, Pat came in and we're still working on building that relationship. But one of the neat things that he did with my team over the summer, because it's really important that my relationship with my athletic director also transcends to my team having a relationship with my athletic director. And that's really important because the team is essentially fighting for you and for the university. They're supposed to bleed the university's colors. Well, the person in charge of everything, they should know. And so Pat was willing to, over the summer, get on a couple Zoom calls with our team and introduce himself and let his personality be transparent with them. Because losing Martin, he's a basketball guy. So he would come to our practices and the players felt close with him. Now that helped them feel pretty close with Pat as well. And I think that's a big help. But again, with Pat, we're still building that relationship. And I think, like I said, it's really tough through COVID because our interactions haven't been enough face-to-face because there's so many things. But what I liked about Pat is he was really honest, where we were all panicking. Like, I know I was panicking as a basketball coach because we didn't have summer practices at Boston College. We didn't know where, on Twitter and all social media outlets, you saw a lot of people practicing and getting things in with their teams, and we weren't getting that. And then there was basically everything was about football, football, football. And here, as a basketball coach, we're like, where do we stand? And I thought the best thing he did was on a Zoom call. He said, listen, I know everybody on the Zoom call, all of you coaches are competitive as hell, and all you want to do is win and that's your top priority. And I get that. But this year you have to take a deep breath and think about the bigger picture. And this year isn't going to be a year where you're judged so harshly on your success. It's going to be more so how you handle the success and get your players through it. And health is the biggest and most important thing. And him being transparent with us, it just made us, I know all of us coaches feel like, all right, and it took us now, like, am I worried about my budget being cut? No, not as much, because I know that I'm just worried about keeping my players healthy and making sure that we're going to compete and have fun and enjoy each other through the crisis. And he's continually telling us to make sure I guess I get how you would say, he's keeping us grounded through it. And so as an athletic director, that makes me already want to have his back and fight for him, because he's, showing us that, yes, it's our job is competitive, but how great is it to have somebody that says, okay, it's competitive, but your kids' safety and their health is really important. And you guys staying to the course of getting your team and your staff through this without losing your minds is really important. So I'd say, and then both places we had sports. I had a sports administrator at both places, and I was lucky through the department change with Martin to Pat. I got to keep the same sports administrator. So I think that made the transition really smooth. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely, Coach. And I think, what I've heard from the first two panelists, and I think everybody's heard, is transparency, honesty, support, particularly in a time like this. I think if administrators are transparent and honest, then the support's going to come with that, right? You're going to feel supported as a coach if your administrators are those two things. And so I really appreciate that, Coach. Doc Sander, I think we were talking last night, and there's an important nuanced difference between an AD or an administrator going to a new place and inheriting a coach and an AD who hires a coach. Let's focus on your experience going to ETSU initially as the interim AD. What did you do to ensure your coaches and staff knew what your expectations of them were? And how did those expectations accelerate or change or shift once that interim title came off?
Well, thanks, Alex. I think the last two panelists were great. I really appreciate them sharing those thoughts. So for me, I kind of came here to ETSU just on I thought I was going to be here a couple months, but, President Nolan had asked me to come in and really help, kind of restructure, reform, the athletic department. So for me, it's a lot what Mark said initially, is you really want to meet with everybody. You want to communicate. You want to be open. You want to share your thoughts and ideas. But I think, what's really critically important is I really think you have to build an infrastructure before you kind of get out and do all the external things. You really have to be solid internally. You really have to have this unity of your staff and your coaches. But I think one of the things that, is important for me is, over the years, I've really been fortunate to hire and work with a lot of great coaches. Denise Schilte-Brown did an incredible job at VCU to build our soccer program, but also Anthony Grant, Jeff Capel, here Steve Forbes, Paul Costin, one of the greatest tennis coaches who's ever coached the game, Paul Keys, who was an incredible baseball coach. But the one thing that I noticed is that the one thing that really separated the great coaches from maybe those folks that really weren't successful was their relationship with the players. And it was more than just whether it was on the court, on the diamond, on the field, whatever it was, but it was their willingness to spend time and energize with you know, their student athletes. So as I got here, one of the things that I really felt was important is I really watched that, you know, and I talked to all the coaches and kind of share with them my ideas, my thoughts, but I really watched their interaction with their student athletes. When practice was over, did they, you know, get in their car and go home to their big fancy houses? You know, did they stay with the guys or gals and be available for them to talk? Would they spend time in the locker room? Would they go to lunch with them? Would they do those sort of things? Were they engaging, or were they somebody that just coached a team and they were gone? You know, so you started to notice and watch that. So that was really important to me as I started to evaluate that. Then I'd watch the teams. I'd watch how the teams, you know, interacted with one another, how they played, how hard they played. You know, I was a former coach, so playing hard is really important to me. So I watched all that. And then, you know, you start to get a feel for what's going on, and you talk to your staff. Now, I shared with you last night, one of the things that was really disappointing to me at ETSU, I got here and we had a program that I thought was really underperforming. When I'd watch the team play, they played with no energy, they played with no enthusiasm, they were selfish, they looked disorganized. And so, you know, I'm thinking, you know, this team, for us to move forward at ETSU, we really need to make a change. So, you know, we did. We called the coach in and said, you know, sorry. And, you know, she had a year left on her contract, and, you know, said, we just have to make this change. Well, a couple months later, I got a letter from a student athlete who had transferred to another school who wanted us to help her with her waiver. And she had this laundry list of issues that she had with the coach. And one of them, clearly the common thread that was through all that, is the coach was basically an alcoholic. She'd come to practice drunk. They'd go on road trips and they'd have to get off the bus because she'd throw up because she had too much to drink. She left a couple players one time, you know, at an airport because, you know, she clearly wasn't lucid. So she clearly had an alcohol problem. So, I mean, I felt that was my fault because, you know, when I went to some of the senior staff that was here at ETSU, they knew that, but they didn't feel comfortable sharing that with me. So for me, I felt really bad because I hadn't developed enough of a relationship with our staff to kind of share those things. So I think it's really important, like Mark said, you really, really have to focus on the internal piece of it and develop those relationships before you get to the external piece. But watch these coaches. Make sure you understand, you know, if they have issues, everything that's out there, because, you know, that's going to be basically, they're the ones that are dealing with the student athletes. And I felt horrible because, you know, our student athletes in that particular program were getting a really bad experience. And that was, you know, our responsibility. And I felt, you know, we should have been able to do something about that quicker. So, I mean, my advice to you is really watch, really pay attention to every little thing. I mean, if head coaches don't come to staff meetings, or if they feel like they're too important, you know, we have a coaches meeting, but the men's basketball coach is too important to come to the staff meeting. To me, those are huge signals, you know, that those, we're just not, you know, we just don't have the same focus, and we're not going to get along, to be perfectly honest. I want people who are totally committed to what we're trying to do. And I think in my experience, as you watch how they interact with not only their players, but with other staff, when you see, one of your major head coaches being, what would I say, not engaging with, you know, interns or young staff members, they think they're too important. To me, that sends up bad messages. So I would encourage everybody, when you get that job, pay attention to all those signals that are out there, and they're out there if you pay enough attention. So that would be kind of, as you go into a new program, or, you know, if you change into a program, pay attention to those things because they're very, very important.
Thanks, Doc. Details, always a big part of it and easy to be overlooked, especially when you're going into this job. You can feel overwhelmed and you're going to focus on what it's going to take big picture, but oftentimes what's going to bite you in the ass are the details that you miss. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Alex, is just, you know, make sure, you know, that your coaches understand, you know, your priorities and where you're headed and what your expectations are, you know, and sometimes you have people that, you know, who have been there a long time and had some success, but, you know, they need to be part of the team. Just they understand that their players have to be part of the team. Hopefully they understand that they need part of your overall team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jeff, building off the question that I asked Doc, let's focus on setting expectations early for a head coach hire. As the founder of a successful search consulting firm that is deeply involved in hiring of coaches and administrators, how upfront are you in the process with sharing expectations, whether it be wins and losses, APR, grad rate, NCAA tournament appearances, whatever those expectations are with potential candidates? And how might that correlate or mesh with what you've seen university administrators share in that regard on the front end of a search?
Well, I think you start by understanding in our business that we all live in this family of college athletics. And it is rare that a search, particularly a prominent coach search, happens without everybody in the country knowing that it's going on. So I think what that tells us is usually, and I've said this before, I mean, there's usually 95% of the cases, there's two reasons why you're looking for a new head coach. One is that you failed and it hasn't worked with that previous coach. And there are specific reasons why it hasn't worked. The other is that you've been so successful that somebody came and plucked your head coach. So when you're asking for what are the expectations, I think it's very different between those two scenarios. In the one scenario, I think it's very clear, and we have to make clear, here were the issues that our previous coaching staff failed at. And these are the things that need to be addressed here. And on the other side, you're probably looking for someone who can continue the success you've had and the good things that are working. I think about just the searches that I've been associated with. I mean, way back, this tells you how old I am, but I was on the Kansas State staff that hired Bill Snyder for his first round at Kansas State. And literally the worst football program in FBS football. We didn't call it FBS back then, but we were the worst. And it was easy for him to see all the things that needed to get done at Kansas State to make us competitive, just to be competitive. And that was the only expectation we had at that time was, can you just make us competitive? Can we be in ball games and not lose by 50 points every Big 8 game, which was Big 8 back then? And then there are other searches that I think, again, the luxury of knowing our business pretty well and knowing each other. We just fast forward to 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we did the Georgia Tech women's basketball search. And there were lots of things going on at Georgia Tech in the women's basketball program that are still going on. And so us to find the right fit for Georgia Tech at that point in their time was really important. And the women in that program needed specific attention. And we felt like Nell Fortner was the right pick to calm things down and bring a great experience to the table. And it's turned out wonderfully. I live here in Atlanta, so I get to see it firsthand. But I think that's the important piece for all of us, is to know what we're looking for, make sure that the coach understands, and I'm going to follow one of Doc's comments here, and that is there are certain expectations that you might not think about. And he mentioned coaches meeting, and I'll tell a story. When I hired Brady Hoke at San Diego State as our new football coach, the first head coaches meeting, he didn't show up. And I had to have a discussion with Brady to say, no, the head coach has to be here. And he was great. He said, okay. Where I came from, the head coach didn't have to be there. So I think setting those kinds of expectations, sometimes you don't think about it during the search, but good things to talk about as well.
Great, thank you. Yes, I think it's, oh, as my phone rings, I apologize. I think it's important, and I think about it here at our level, low, mid-major level, that in some of our sports, the athletic expectation isn't going to be that high. It's going to be able to compete in the league, maybe finish top half of the league, but we're not necessarily going to ask those coaches to come in and win a championship. In other sports, that might be different, but there is definitely a varying level of priority there, and it's something absolutely that we all need to be cognizant of. So thank you. Coach Sampson, shifting to you, you've coached and had success at just about every level of the game. National Coach of the Year, Conference Coach of the Year, NBA assistant. This also means that you've worked with a lot of administrators over the years. What commonalities can you share and expound upon with the most successful relationships you've had with administrators, but also what commonalities have existed when the relationships might not have been as strong?
Let's start with the first one, Alex. When I got the request to do this, I started counting. I literally had to take get on my whiteboard with a marker, and I said, okay, Montana Tech, Washington State, Oklahoma, Indiana, Houston. I've worked for 11 different athletic directors. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I've become an expert and at least, I don't know if judging is the right word, but have an opinion on what makes a good athletic director. You learn to put them in two categories. You have some that are facilitators and you have some that are inhibitors. And a lot of it has to do with their personalities. There's three athletic directors that really stand out to me, and the commonality that all three had were they were tremendous family people. They were grounded by their families. As they got to know me, I felt they cared more about my wife and my two children than they did me on some instances. One was Jim Livengood, who I worked for at Washington State University. I was young, probably in some instances, maybe didn't deserve the coach. Probably wasn't good enough to be the head coach in the Pac-10 when I was 30 years old. But I got hired, and I struggled. I inherited, like Jeff said, there's a couple, 95% of the time, it's one of two things why you get a job as an athletic director, but with the coach, it's the same way. The coach that preceded me, I think, had 4 or 5, I can't remember, consecutive losing seasons. Washington State, budget-wise, was in trouble. So I was a head coach at Washington State University when I was 30 years old in 1987. My salary was $42,000 a year. I had a 2-year contract. If that doesn't send you a clear message of what's important and their belief in you, at the same time, I don't know what will. First year was okay. Second year was bad. Third year was horrible. We lost 18 consecutive games. In today's age, I would have never survived my third year. The reason I survived my third year was because of my athletic director. My name is spelled Kelvin, Kelvin. But Jim never called me Kelvin. He always called me K-Man. He'd come in after games, and after games, my wife and my 2 kids would always be in the coach's area with me. And he was the most supportive. I used to get pissed off at him because I wanted to be mad about losing. And Jim was always, don't worry about it. Our best days are so far ahead of us. We're going to be fine. but after our 5th consecutive loss, our 10th consecutive loss, our 16th consecutive loss, he never wavered. Now in November of that year, we had he didn't know, athletic directors don't know how good your recruiting class is. They're judging their opinion based on what you say, right? You say it was, and nobody ever has a bad recruiting class, but we did have a good recruiting class. And I think the coaches in the Pac-10 back then, Lute Olson, Mike Montgomery, George Raveling, Ralph Miller, I think those guys felt sorry for me. And the next year we went 16-11 or 17-11, something like that. And they voted me coach of the year because they were afraid that they were going to fire me and get somebody who could really coach, and they wouldn't beat Washington State. But we went on and had success there. But Jim Livengood, I'll always look back at his impact on my life because of his belief in me and my family and the way he treated our family. Athletic directors that look at themselves as bosses hardly ever make it. The collaborative effort between the AD and the coach is important. Getting to know his wife and the way he treats his wife tells you a lot about an AD. And that's from 32 years as a head coach. And I can look back, the ADs that struggled when I worked for them were the ones that never understood that head coach has a life. His life isn't just working with you or for you. His wife and his family, his aspirations, his history, what's important to him, how he's handled things in the past. Did he get knocked down? Did he get up? How did he get up? How did he handle success? The athletic director at East Tennessee State, I learned a lot from him, listening to him talk about the coach that had the drinking problem. Had the coach before him knew about that, maybe he could have helped. Maybe he could have helped her. And then the other one was Joe Castiglione at Oklahoma. I worked with Joe, I think 9 years. And all 9 years, I think we went to the NCAA tournament. Some years probably didn't deserve to get in, but we either had the right schedule or beat the right team. But every year for 9 years, we would have an end of the year meeting. The meeting was always in my office, never in his office. And Joe and I became friends because of his relationship with my family. He and my wife were almost best friends. He knew more about Kellen and Lauren during the season than I did, probably. So now here was a repeat performance from Jim Livengood to Joe Castiglione. There's sometimes athletic directors feel, especially if a coach isn't doing good, that you have to start distancing yourself from him because you know what's coming, the inevitable. But I would think from a coach's standpoint, it needs to be the other way around. Supporting a coach isn't just supporting his program, it's supporting him. And when you support him, you're supporting his family. His family is the most important thing to him. I have an athletic director now, Chris Pesman, and he's my third athletic director since I've been at the University of Houston. And he said, Coach, ADs will always say, what's important to you? I always tell them my family. My family is way more important to me than this job. If I don't have this job, I'll get another job. If you don't have me as a coach, you're going to get another coach, but I'm never going to get another family. The family is the most important thing, and athletic directors have to understand that. So the word commonality to me means what athletic directors share a thread or a successful bond. And that's what a commonality to me is, a successful bond. Let me go back to Joe. He would always come to my office, and if you go to a tournament, there's a level of success, maybe not the success level that the coach would like. making the tournament eventually didn't become the goal. I felt like we were in a position some of those years that maybe we could win the tournament. And we got to a Final Four, we got to an Elite Eight, a couple Sweet 16s. And then we had 5 years where we got beat the first game. So a lot of people will see that as failure. But Joe always he asked the same question every year for 9 years. Coach, what do you think we need to do to get better? How can I help you grow this program? It might be a pool table in the locker room, a new locker room, assistant coaches' salaries, more money in our buy game budget, or more charters, whatever it is. But where I got, how our program got better? Joe had the best ideas. His ideas for making our program better was better than mine. He was smarter than I was. He would say, Coach, I think if we did this, or what do you think about this? And that always helped me. I was thinking one way, but Joe was thinking in a much bigger picture. And which means that he had to somehow, some way accomplish that to be able to give it to our program. But Joe was unique in that way, and that the more successful we were, the better he helped us. He was never took our success for granted. He never took me for granted, and he never took our family my family for granted. And then the third assistant coach was that I worked for that I thought was going to be good was Hunter Yurachek at Houston, who's now at Arkansas. Hunter played Division III basketball at Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina. That impacted me because I played NAIA basketball at University of North Carolina at Pembroke, North Carolina. And when I played, Guilford and Pembroke were in the same conference. I didn't know Hunter that well, but he was at a bigger school, not the biggest, but a bigger school. But he still had his small college values, and that never left him. When athletic directors move up the ladder, you can't ever forget where you came from. Sometimes immaturity will lead to ego problems. And the athletic directors, to me, that have struggled are the ones that thought they were a little bit more important than they actually were. Don't ever lose sight of where you came from. I came from an NAIA school in North Carolina, about as small as it can get. That put a chip on my shoulder that's never left. I still have that chip on my shoulder. I still coach with a chip on my shoulder because where I came from, and when I started, I wasn't quite sure I was good enough. So that drove me to work a little bit harder, work a little bit longer, and base everything on my effort. And the athletic directors that I've worked for that have been the best athletic directors, not just for me, but for their careers, were the ones that never forgot where they came from. And they had those, the values that drove them early in their careers were the same values that drove them late in their careers. And the other thing that they have in common is common sense. Common sense is not something you can learn. You either have it or you don't. The people that hire the athletic directors usually have great common sense. Analytical people tend to hire analytical people. Common sense people tend to hire common sense people. The best athletic directors that I've worked for were they just knew what to say and when to say it. But more importantly, they knew what not to say, which leads to when not to say it. So I think hopefully I've answered the question on both sides by
Fantastic.
Given those thoughts. But the best athletic directors remain your friends for years. I'll end with that.
Thank you, Coach. Yeah, I think as administrators, as soon as our coaches get a sense that they're working for us versus with us, that's when that's when the relationship is strained and in trouble. So good words to remember there, Coach. Appreciate that. And the last question but certainly not least, that I have for the panel, and then hopefully we'll get some more questions in the queue to Denise Schilte-Brown. Coach, you've been one of the most successful women's soccer head coaches of the last 2 decades, first at VCU, then USF. As the only Olympic head coach on this panel, describe how you've been able to navigate the relationships with your administrators, your athletic directors, to ensure you and your programs have been positioned for the success that you have, particularly in an environment when basketball and football seemingly get a lot of the attention.
First of all, I'm really honored to be here. And, a great segue from this is what Coach Kelvin just said. If they're a great athletic director, they're your friend for life. So, I'm honored to be here because of my friendship with Dr. Sanders. Dr. Sander, he's been such a tremendous advocate of mine and friend. And yeah, it speaks volumes about what an amazing athletic director he was. And I've had 7, I went through the list today in my head, 7 athletic directors. I don't know, maybe that doesn't sound like a lot, but it seems like a lot. And Doc is still the one for me, my reference of that I would use for the examples of the type of athletic director that I think young aspiring administrators and athletic directors should aspire to be. And I'm gonna talk about that in 3 kind of areas that I hope will be helpful of why I feel that way about Doc. The first one is just the value of authenticity or genuineness. And it goes back to, again, tying into what Coach Calvin just said, is like, I believe that Dr. Sanders took the time to understand me, to value me, and know what my heart was, know what my goals were, know what was important to me. And then vice versa, I knew that he cared about that, and I knew what his values were. I honestly do not understand to this day why he took the chance on me that he did. I didn't see in me what he saw in me. So I'm super blessed by that. But I knew that Dr. Sander loved winning, and he knew how to do it. He wasn't all about everything else. He knew the 3 components to being successful: treat your coaches well, pay them really well, give them the scholarship dollars and recruiting dollars, and the rest is fluff. And I understood that if I went into his office and I asked for new uniforms or new video equipment, I mean, he would laugh at me, literally laugh at me. And that, I understood that, but if I asked to get on a plane to go to France and I had to be on the plane in the next 4 days because I knew I could wrap up one of the better players in the country, there was no hesitation. Get on that plane, buy the ticket now, go win. And that was awesome. But the value of him knowing me and that genuineness was also just, it helped with that relationship. And Doc, I don't know if you remember, but I was so emotional because I was pregnant with not 1 child, but 2. So that drives you a little bit crazier. So for those of you guys that don't know, 2 babies, you're a little crazier. And I went into his office asking for a raise, and his right-hand man, Jeff Cups, who I love to this day as well, he said, no, immediately, no, you're not getting a raise. That's not happening. And I looked at Doc and I'm saying, I need a raise. I'm having 2 babies. And he increased my salary. And I think it was a little bit because of success I was having. It wasn't a great successful year, but it was based on my life. He understood that I needed that at the moment. So really understanding, knowing your athletic director was important. And I think it depends on the school, because some athletic directors have really empowered the administrators and they speak for the athletic director. I thought that was interesting when I interviewed at the University of Pittsburgh. I loved how the athletic director empowered her administrators to know her heart so well that the coaches would know that they didn't have to go to their athletic director. They could speak through their administrator, and they knew each other so well. So that was a huge draw for me, or interest for me there. But and here at USF, I've really taken the time to get to know my direct supervisor. He knows what I'm about. So if you make a mistake, and in this landscape of like, racial diversity and all the issues that are in COVID and are sensitive topics, it's so important that your athletic director, administrator knows you, because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing or handle something a little bit differently. But if they know you really well, then they know they can probably predict your mistakes before you make them. And so that's really, really helpful. My second point about the athletic director is, you asked the question in terms of like football and basketball, and I am the only non-representative here. And it would be very easy for an Olympic sport coach to feel insignificant, to feel like, okay, as long as football and basketball do well, then that's what's important. And then I'm going to try to toe my line. But that was changed for me at VCU. It was my only experience. And Dr. Sanders was my second athletic director in my life, but he made it so clear that we as Olympic sports were valued equally to that of basketball there, which basketball like rules at VCU. But Dr. Sanders, I will never forget the meeting. I don't know if you remember it, but you stood up in front of all the coaches, furious because we were all like discussing pay increases and what the year would be like after successful years. And Dr. Sanders told every coach in the room that we probably won't get increases because one coach went behind his back and parlayed a deal with the president and took all the money for the year. And it felt so good to know that my athletic director was not okay with all the money going to the top sport, that he felt like this was a decision that was his decision and should have been shared amongst the sports. So because he created that empire at VCU, I don't know if you guys remember that, but VCU was really good in every single sport. Like Dr. Sander put VCU on the map, not because of basketball, and we didn't have football, but he put us on the map because men's soccer was good, women's soccer was good, baseball was good, volleyball was good. Like all our Olympic sports were like competing in NCAA and conference championships. And he made us all feel like if we were all good together, that was enough to put us on the map. So now that I had that experience, that hasn't been the same always at my school, but I believe it because Doc believed it. And I saw the roadmap of what, if all the Olympic sports are successful, how great that can be for a university. So I'm a pain in the ass. I fight for everything I need. I fight for everything to win. And because I do feel like winning in women's soccer has value to the athletic department, value to the big sports. And I believe that Doc helped set the stage for that. So you as administrators, you're the ones that can empower coaches to feel like they matter in terms of their results. And then the last part for me would be a lot of athletic directors in their interviews and administrators, they like to call themselves like a coach's AD. You hear this term all the time. And, I'm a coach's AD or I'm a coach's administrator. And I think it's very hard to be a coach's AD and a coach's administrator. And I don't think there's many out there that do it well. And Doc, I think you did that really well. And I just want to share to the administrators or future, powerful administrators, what that looks like to a coach. And to me, to be a coach's athletic director is to have my back. Like, of course you give a voice to the student athletes, to parents, to the other administrators. They have a voice, but the athletic director believes in me first. Like, you can't come between us. He hired me for a reason. He believed in me for a reason. He knew what I was about and why I did it. So when someone questioned that, he immediately didn't turn around and question me, he questioned the person that was challenging my character or challenging my decision. It was like he knew what angle I was coming from, and that was really helpful. And that was the same at competitions. I mean, if a referee went against a call for me, I think Dr. Sander was going to storm the field for me. And that felt amazing. When an opposing coach, Doc, I don't know if you remember this, but the University of Richmond coach wanted to cancel the game because of weather. And he said, you know, I'm Dr. Sander, I'm the athletic director, and we are playing this game tonight. So I always knew that there was somebody, you know, very powerful that had my back, and that I could go to directly. So those three things, I hope they help. One is just, again, to review, was this the authenticity of the genuineness of the relationship, caring about my family, the coach-driven athletic director that truly feels like you have your back, and then feeling valued as an Olympic sport. That tone or stage is set by the person in charge. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you, Coach. One thing I learned there was I was so surprised to hear that Doc would go after an official if they. So
he almost ran on the field. He was awesome.
I think I've learned from him unintentionally. Anyway, we will get to our questions. We're going to extend by about 5 minutes. I really appreciate our panelists with all the insight, but do want to get to a few questions. First up, my good friend Rick Canter from Longwood University has a question. I will direct these questions, or let's direct these questions to one individual to answer them.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all the panelists. It's unbelievably tremendous to hear your insight and learn from your experience. This one will go to Mark Benson. How do you balance the quantitative expectations of maybe the wins and losses and the qualitative expectations of respect, civility in the workplace, integrity, when you are holistically analyzing a state of a program, as well as in how does that potentially change within this next year with all of the various stressors that we're seeing?
Well, that's a good question. So I don't know, for me, I've been fortunate. I've always been part of, good competitive winning programs. And I think the thing that I've observed over the years is if you focus on the process and not the result, and you surround yourself with people that you're philosophically aligned with, I think your chances of success really go through the roof. And so I've always been somebody that, Joanna talked about, the conversations we had. She followed a coach that won 5 consecutive America East championships. It's hard to beat Florida in the NCAA first round tournament. Hard to get from Albany, New York. That's a pretty tall task. And we talked about, we want to win championships. That's what we want to do. And we want to put every one of our teams, Olympic sport or not, in a position to win an America East championship and go on to the NCAAs. But we never talk about a number, and we talk about the process. Hire good people, empower them to do their job, support them where you can. And Coach Brown, I love hearing that example of, the three things that matter. You're spot on. Treat people well, pay them well, or what you can pay them, give them the scholarship money, the resources, and everything else is fluff. And I agree. University of Albany, we've been in the Final Four in men's lacrosse and field hockey, and we are nowhere near the top of the resource list when it comes to some of the teams that we're competing with. So I could not agree more. And then given, I think you said during this time we're in, I think somebody mentioned it earlier, sort of, not that the expectations are out the window this year, but we're not looking at this as a normal year. This is a year where we need to, survive and advance is a great phrase from the NCAA. We need to borrow that. And I think survive, most important, get through this year and see what happens on the other side. But also, to your point about winning, it's never, if you're just judging a program solely on wins and losses, you're missing the point. There's so much more that goes into a successful program. Winning is a successful season, right? A healthy program is doing well in academics, doing well on the court, doing well in the community, treating your campus leadership well, treating your community well, being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And then the other stuff will take care of itself. I don't know if that answered it, but I hope it did.
It does. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. Next question we have, I'm not going to screw up his last name, Matt from Dayton.
Thanks, Alex. I have a two-part question. Just thinking back to what the presidents were talking about, for the administrators or for anyone, how do you manage or handle your president's expectations of program success versus your realistic expectations? And then for the coaches, maybe specifically Coach Sampson, how do you handle the president's expectations versus the AD's expectations and not souring the relationship with either one of them?
Doc, let's have you take the administrative.
Yeah, well, I think you really get a feel for presidents. I've dealt with 3 different presidents, and, they've all been considerably different. But I think you really have to have, a plan and share with them the plan. I don't think you need to go into great details, but I think just like anything, and I think Debbie Yao may have talked about this earlier, you build equity as you build more and more trust within your relationship with your president. They get to know you and they're comfortable with what you're doing. So I've been blessed. I had 3 presidents. They all were good to me. They all were great to me. They allowed me to do what I did, but I think I had the ability to communicate with them on an early, in an early way of how I communicated, and I could read them as to what their expectations were. A big part of it is, you really need to read the president because they were all different. They all wanted different information. So I think, read your president, talk to him, get to know him, and realize, I think, President Broderick actually said this, they're human beings. Get to know them, get to know what's important to them, get to know kind of who they are and develop a personal relationship with them. But I think, a big part of it is, just communicating and understanding the best way to do that. So, but like I say, really take great time in watching them, watching the way they engage, watching the way they interact. I think that's such an important piece of being an athletic director. If you think you're the one who's developing, the agenda and the itinerary, you're probably going to make a mistake. Listen and watch. They will give you cues and clues, and take those cues and clues and deal with them.
Coach Sampson, do you have anything to add from your perspective as a coach?
I've always thought coaches and players' responsibilities to win games, but administrators' jobs to win championships. 2 years, this stretch we're on right now, our first, I don't remember what year it was, we beat San Diego State in the first round, lost to Michigan in the second round. But I did an interview after the San Diego State game, and they asked me about, I think it'd been 15 years, or 20 years where they've gone to one NCAA tournament in 20 years. And they asked, they were trying to, toot my horn and all that stuff that they do on TV. And I said, look, our president and our athletic director have as much to do with this as I do, because of the support they gave our team. But, when I was talking to Houston about coming over here and doing this job, the president made a statement that I had to educate her on. She said, we expect to win championships. And I said, why would you expect to win championships when you haven't won one since 1984? But she thought that was what she was supposed to say. Then I took out a pen and paper and I wrote down everybody in the league, and I put where I thought Houston was in the league, which was 3rd from the bottom. I said, this is where you are right now. This isn't an opinion, this is a fact. So I think it's important to educate people that don't know what they're talking about. That doesn't mean that the president's a bad person, but sometimes the president's expertise isn't always in athletics. But presidents are competitive people. They want to win. But I think perspective is important, and you can't be afraid to give them perspective. You can't hire a coach and say, "Yeah, we're going to win championships." No. I've always thought that if we win a championship, it's because of the athletic director, the coach, and the players. Everybody has to be together on that. But You know, I mentioned common sense earlier. You know, coaches and athletic directors know how to educate. You know, it's like when someone asks you a question in a press conference, you may not answer that question with what it calls for, but that's an opportunity to educate people on who you are, where you are, and where you're headed. We're never going to stay where we are. We're either going to get better, or we're going to get worse, but you're not going to stay where you are. But to be successful, you better have a president and an athletic director that's in line with reality. And the only way they're going to know reality is to educate them. You know, some presidents that are all presidents are academic, right? But some are academic, and then there's a huge line, and then there's athletics. You know, the only thing they know about athletics is from people they talk to. And a lot of the people they talk to are clueless. So how are they going to be educated? And that's where the ability to put your programs in perspective and where you're headed. You know, I go back to Jim Livengood. You know, we lost 18 games in a row my third year, and today I would be fired. But he did a great job with Dr. Sam Smith, who was the president at Washington State University at the time, to sell him or convince him that our program was going to be okay. We've got to trust in Kelvin. You know, an athletic director's ability to educate and to bring into reality, and you can read between the lines there with the president, is as important as anything else, because that creates a comfortable working relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you, Coach. And I just want to thank all of our panelists for the time and the incredible insight. Tim, why don't you send me your question via email, and I can make sure it gets answered. We're going to have to end this, unfortunately, to move on to the roundtable. But again, before I pass it on to Doc, I want to thank our panelists and thank the group for a great session. And I know I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. So with that, I'll give it back to Doc Sander.